strategy,
design,
marketing,
UX,
digital.
development.
This is Agencies That Build. This show is dedicated to leaders and teams that design and deploy in the digital world. My name is Jessie, and I'm a marketer and an agency owner.
And I'm Varun. I'm not a marketer, but a coder and an agency partner.
This show is sponsored by Together We Ship.
On a mission to help agencies grow.
All right, rock on. I'm going to say rock on because I'm dressed as this is my rock and roll persona today. So, and we're here. Varun, how are you, my friend?
Great. Who do we have today as a guest?
Today, we have an avid mountain biker, also an avid basketball fan, if I'm not mistaken, the Chicago Bulls specifically. He's an entrepreneur. He's an agency builder. He's the managing director of Paperleaf, Jeff Archibald. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, you two.
We're happy to be here. Did I get that right in the Chicago Bulls?
No, I'm actually a Celtics and Raptors fan, but
okay.
I mean, who wasn't a Michael Jordan fan back in the day, right? We're all Bulls fans deep down.
Yeah, deep down, people of a certain age. We'll just leave that one right there.
Exactly.
Well, so the Celtics are near and dear to my heart, being a Boston.
There you go.
Boston area, so can't say much about the Raptors. But anyways, let's dive into our favorite question of the day, of the conversation. What myth would you like to smash? What sort of misconception, bogus misconception, or something you want to set the record straight on? What do you want to clear up? Hit us. What do you got?
I think the whole idea around false hustle, or the correlation that if you're working 60 or 80-hour weeks, you're somehow doing a better job than everybody else, or you're more deserved than somebody else. I wrote a post about this ages ago on my personal site, but the kind of counter take that I have on that is, if you're working 60 or 80-hour weeks, or really anything over 40, outside of the instances where you're having to wear 5 hats and you're super tiny, one person trying to do everything, outside of those instances, I don't really think it's a good thing. I don't think it's something to be proud of or to brag about online. I think it's actually an indication that you haven't structured a sustainable organization yet. So instead of going online or shooting the breeze with your friends over a pint and bragging about how many hours you put in that week, maybe you should kind of be disappointed if you have to talk about that. You know what I mean?
I love this concept because I feel like if we had this conversation a year and change ago, your opinion would be probably similar since you've written the blog post, and this is a conversation topic. But after COVID, I feel like you're going to get a lot more people who agree with you.
I would think so, yeah. And there's a weird subset of people, especially like kind of in the entrepreneurial scene, that this more explicitly applies to, or at least I see it in the circles I travel in. And maybe, since most of us have been working from home, if we've been so fortunate over the last 14, 15 months, maybe that's changed our perspectives a little bit. That kind of hit me on the head, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 years ago, because I was that person, and I was kind of proud at how much mileage I was putting on. And then I kind of realized one day the only reason I was doing that is because I hadn't set up systems of accountability or the structures you need in place to actually grow an organization and make it a sustainable place to be.
Well, it also, I think, to some extent depends on where you are in terms of your growth and the company size, right? When you are small, you're growing, you want to put more hours, because not only for money, not only for more work, but also to gain experience and things like that. But as you get more experience, you become more mature, and you understand the values of time and efficiency and all that. Then it strikes you like, yes, more hours does not mean better life, or more time, or more hours doesn't mean more money every time.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head, Vern. Like I was totally that person for probably the first, I don't know, 5 years at least of building the shop. And we were pretty green when we started, and we were so frankly scared to grow because we didn't really know how. That I would just do client meetings and emails and promotion all day, and then do all the client work all night. You know what I mean? And then at a certain point, as you start to get a few more reps under your belt, at least for me anyways, yeah, I started to figure out that I was sprinting and this was a marathon and I wasn't going to make it very far if I kept doing this. Um, and also was able to get to the point where you actually, can hire some people on and take some of those risks. It's feasible because at the start it really isn't, when you're working out of your house or whatever.
And this is actually an interesting topic for especially our listeners who are, fairly smaller agencies, because you have seen that trajectory. You have, passed through that phase of your life, and you have done that. Going back, would you say has that helped you to become what you are now, or would you change that mindset if you were able to go back in time and tell yourself what should you be doing, you know
Yeah, like I think I'm not one of those persons like that's like no regrets. I very much have regrets.
yeah.
um, but that isn't one of them. I think, it's putting in that amount of time. I'm not, it wasn't necessarily the right thing to do, but it made me realize the value of my time and how much effort I should be putting in certain places. And it also, like, when you touch every part of the agency, when there's just one or two or three of you, it's really helpful because as you start to backfill those roles that you're stepping out of or that I was stepping out of, you understand them better. You understand kind of what they need to succeed. The expectations are a little bit more reasonable than for me if I was trying to backfill some role that we never had. You know what I mean? That's a lot more difficult. So yeah, I'm those times are challenging, and I worked a lot more hours volume wise than I do now. But I don't think I would necessarily change it. And then also then I was like, when you start something new, you still have the sheen and the luster on it, and you have the gas in the tank to do that. But it only lasts for so long.
Did you, I have a couple more questions on this because I feel like when you talked about stepping out of some of those roles, I think that's one of a hard stepping stone for teeny tiny people. Teeny tiny companies.
I'm only 3'7", so
yeah. Oops, sorry. Based on your experience with that, where would you say, and maybe Varun, I'll ask both of you this question, where was the first place you stepped out of? And was that a good decision? Do you regret it, or should it have been a different role? Maybe Jeff, take that one first.
Yeah, for sure. And we're not anywhere the size of Varun's firm is, but the first place I stepped out of was web development. So, I was never particularly any good at it. You know what I mean? I figured it out on the fly. A lot of online tutorials and code that never should have made it to a production server kind of thing. So I was actually pretty eager to step out of that because, I was getting to the point where requests were coming in that frankly, I just didn't really have the chops to do or didn't know how to do it. So that was the first role I stepped out of, and we hired a web developer first. And, I was able to focus more on my strengths on the client side and specifically on the design side. And, it kind of went piecemeal by there. What about you, Varun?
Yeah, no, I started as a developer myself too. When we started the company, in my case, the company was already, running by my partner. He had a team, but when I joined, it was similar. I had to learn the profession. If I'm getting into development, I need to, understand how everything goes. So I did the same. But for me, the point was when we were at a point when my time as developer was not equivalent to the amount of money we can make by having somebody else do the job, right? Delegation comes at that point. I can do, because my job was mostly like, as an owner, you are always selling and doing business dev. So the more time and I can put in selling and thinking about that, the less time I have to worry about, doing dev by having someone else do the job. So I think it took me like 10 years to get to that point. We were in a very slow growth trajectory in the beginning.
Right.
So it took me a long time. I think it was a good experience. I wouldn't change that ever. Like, I think if I did not do that, I wouldn't have understood the nuts and bolts of, nitty gritties of this world. So
Yeah, for sure. Like having a bit of that background in dev definitely helped me to, throw around some somewhat harebrained ideas when we were in the solution generating phase. But for me anyways, because I wasn't particularly good at it, it was easier to step out of. The harder one for me was stepping out of both project management and design, because
Mm.
I was much more competent in those areas, and so I had higher standards and things like that. But those are a little bit more difficult.
It's having done this differently, worked within organizations and run on teams within organizations, it's the hardest point in a career, whether you're at an agency or not, to move from tactical to strategic, which is, I had an old manager, an old CMO of mine said that to me. He goes, you need to start, he literally said, you need to start, it's going to be the hardest thing you do in your career, but think strategically. And as business owners, that's, and get out of that tactical. And so like for me, the project management, stop, you got to like let it go. And hiring a bookkeeper.
Yeah, we hired one of those early on, and that was a lifesaver because
that game changer. If I don't have to do the books, then we're good to go. So
yeah.
But
so you can hear my dog Gus in the background. He's letting me know that people are wandering around.
Welcome to the podcast, Gus.
Yeah. He's a real star of the show.
Aren't they all? Mine will meander in here at some point because it's
Nice.
WALK time. So well, that leads me to the next question was, how did you, and Varun, you kind of answer this, but I'll ask you this, Jeff. How did you recognize the point and when you needed to step out? Like, was there something that happened? For Varun, it was a cost thing. He costs more money to do this thing, and we should be spending it here instead. So that would be my question to you, Jeff. Was there a point where you recognized it?
Well, like the first few hires that we had where I started to step out, the first one was just straight up, I just know I'm not good enough at development to get the shop to where I need to go. So that was, relatively straightforward, and I didn't want to do it. So you could kind of make the case, I suppose, that it was more of a lifestyle choice also than anything else.
Well, that's an interesting point. You said you didn't want to do it. I think that's something as agency owners in particular that we feel like we have to, and we don't ever think about like, do I really want to do this? Can I it's such a mindset shift.
Yeah, totally. I hear you. And for me, that part, that was a reason on the development side. And then you mentioned Jesse stepping out of like the tactical into the strategic. Our growth was like the least strategic thing of all time. It was just like we got really busy, and so I need to hire another developer, and then another designer, and then a project manager. And at a certain point, maybe around like 4 or 5, that's when we started to think a little bit more about creating an organization, that had like symbiotic relationships and all things of that nature, rather than just hiring a bunch of individual practitioners, which is kind of what we were doing. But those decisions were relatively straightforward. But like the bigger moment for me, in terms of like if we want to use stepping out as a synonym for delegation or kind of taking a bit of a risk and letting go of the reins a bit, was there's a moment for me about 3 years ago, I think, where the shop was around 10 people, and it was basically 10 individual contributors and me at the top. And I was doing a really poor job of managing people and selling and, just trying to do all the things and doing all of them poorly, and just getting so burnt out and stressed. And I hated the job. And I was actually at one of the Bureau of Digital events. It was an owner camp. And, I was kind of saying, I think I need to get like an operations director or like effectively that middle management layer in place. But I'm kind of like nervous, right? Because it's a whole bunch of additional expense, and I hadn't, I'm not sure I have the work in the pipeline to support it. And one of the guys in the group is just kind of like, I was in your same spot, and honestly, I had the right person. I pulled the trigger, and it was the best decision I ever made. And so that kind of gave me the confidence to go back and do that. So I came back and restructured the company, put in 2 directors at that point, and was just kind of like, you're in charge of development, and you're in charge of design and PM, and then we'll go from there. And that kind of led us to adding in, the design director and now a project director, and it has just made life a whole lot easier, right? Because everybody's has a reasonable amount of work, and can actually do their jobs well. But that was the real linchpin for me, where I was like, okay, I need to stop. I can't look at everything that goes out the door. I can't look at every client communication, you know what I mean? Or else it's either shut down the shop or take this gamble.
Yeah.
And that was the kind of fork in the road moment for me.
I like the reasonable amount of work. It's a good, it's become such a prominent kind of thing as we think about the way that work works.
Yeah.
That work works currently, because back to your original myth, which is 80-hour weeks aren't normal or sustainable or not a point of pride. Reasonable amount of work means, you're actually able to stop and have a meal or take a kid to a ball game or something like that. So
yeah, all of that kind of stuff too. I'd be curious to know for you, Varun, and maybe for you too, Jesse. I'm not too sure your background, but like, there's also a weird moment. For the longest time, it felt like clients were hiring, like my co-founder at the of the company was her name was Andrea. It was like people were hiring Jeff and Andrea to do the work, individuals. And, even as we grew a little bit, it still felt weird for me to have these conversations, feel like they were hiring us, but then, designers and developers would do the work. And I would almost feel like I was misleading people. But then there was a moment, and I don't really know when it was, when people started hiring Paperleaf, the company, and they didn't really care if I was doing the work or not. Did either of you have ever had that in your past?
In my case, no, because the way we always positioned ourselves is a software company first, then an individual. Like when I joined the company, and we were already, I think, 5-7 people. We had some branding, some established brand already there, and then I was not working as an individual. I mean, I was still working as a team. The difference was the team was under me right from beginning. That was unfortunate for them to work under me as a, because I did not have an experience. But that's what you get as a family business, right? But yes, I mean, we positioned ourselves as a company. We always would have said that, this is work we will do as a team. We will bring in designer, developer, QA, and it was not one person. It was not my brand. My personal brand never was at stake. So
right.
And so for me, it's a little bit different because my company was branded after my own name. There's a whole can of worms that goes with that, at the most recent company. And it's kind of one of the reasons people would hire me, but I was very transparent. My goal is to do this and grow this and be here and even rebrand and drop part of the name. So it wasn't just me. I was like transparent about it. And one of the reasons Varun and I kind of started all of this too is because there's partnership opportunities. Coming into the agency world as a solo person for a period of time, even building that up, people, you reach a point in your career, it sounds so cocky and I don't mean it this way, but you have a reputation. People know who you are, they're following you, you've made the connections, like there is a network there. And so they know you, they want to hire you. And being able to be transparent and say, well, you're going to hire me, but you're going to also get some of my proteges and you're going to get people who learn my way of doing things. And, background in marketing in particular, there's a strategic advantage that you're buying, pieces of my brain. So, but there's a way to do things like in development, like in design, how to do it and where to do it and how to treat people and all the things that come with it. So that's a great question, because I feel like that the struggle is real there for some smaller folk too.
Yeah, I feel like there's always like an awkward middle point. It's kind of like your hair. It's a couple of weeks after you're trying to grow your hair out and it looks weird. It's kind of like that in the agency growth side. And then there's a point where your hair looks fine. And to continue the weird metaphor, it's kind of like when at a certain point, everyone who's doing the production work is actually way better than you were anyways. So you're just kind of like, I'm going to hand you off to the people who do the actual work. And that's a good thing, because I'm old school. I don't know how to use Sketch or Figma or any of that stuff anymore. Right. So yeah, no, then it gets a little easier, but there's an awkward middle.
Totally. Well, it's the cell phone problem. it's not working. Can someone fix it? Like, give it to the intern, they'll figure it out, you know?
Pretty much, yeah.
So, you know, at one point in my own growth, I love interns. I love junior people because they know more things than I do. You know, again, an old CMO of mine said 16-year-old humans run the internet.
Pretty much. Yeah.
It's totally true. So like, let them figure it out and I'll just make sure they don't screw it up, you know, and that it looks good and it makes business sense, and we'll teach them all the other things. So you kind of alluded to some of it, but I'd love to talk a little bit about, you have such an interesting story and the acquisition and all of that. This is a topic we have not touched on with other agency owners. And so we'd love to kind of hear, you know, your story a little bit there. We don't usually ask it as bluntly as I am now. Tell us about your history. How did you get into this? But I think it's, you know, keeping in mind, like, we talked a lot about growth and how to build and how to step out. And so, you know, I'd love to kind of have our listeners hear, you know, you had exit goals and they've kind of come to fruition in some case. So, you know, take us back to 2009.
Yeah, that's when we started, right? And like I said, it was myself and Andrea, co-founder, and we started the company and we were working out of the house, and there's two of us, and you know, we worked through a renovation and all of that kind of stuff. And, you know, we slowly grew, like I mentioned, and it was mostly replacing the things I was bad at. And you know, when the backlog got too big, we hired people to shorten that down, that kind of stuff. You know, we went through some of the kind of traditional positioning and niching a little bit, right? So, you know, later on we became more focused on websites and visual identities. That was our first kind of narrowing of the field. And then we focused strictly on digital products, and that's kind of where we're at now. And maybe in the future there'll be a vertical niche. But you know, we grew from, you know, 1 to 4 to 6 to 10, and then just over the last few years is when we grew up to kind of where we're at now, which I think is 22. And you know, back in, I guess it would have been.
That took you about 10 years though. Let's talk about the timeline, because I feel like, you know, the media does such a horrible job of explaining, like, for every, I don't know what the metric is, but for every X number of startups, here's the number who actually make it. You know, not that I wish I had that metric someplace because I use that all the time.
Yeah,
but
it's like, I don't know, it's like 80 or 90% of startups fail, you know, within the first 5 years, something like that. But yeah, we were super slow, you know, and like, and it was just a lot of heads down grunt work that I think got us through it. Like, I think there was some talent there that they were fortunate to draw on, and you know, working out of the house, our expenses were low. We had a lot of privileges that some people don't have, and that's great. But yeah, like, you know, our first 6 months of business, we made 20 grand in top line revenue. In our first year, we made 40 grand, because like, we were just designers who had no idea what we were doing on the business side, right? So we had to figure that out. And you know, we effectively like doubled our revenue every year for a while. And you know, got it up to the point where, you know, when we had our first acquisition inquiry, which was, I guess it would have been 2019. So yeah, it would have been 10 years on the nose. You know, we were just shy of 2 million in revenue, and we got approached by a private equity firm, and I had a conversation with them, and you know, like, good folks, the conversations broke down just because the terms became pretty not agreeable. You know, it was all shares within the funds, no cash in the deal, really long payout. You know, just a lot of the stuff I think you want to avoid if you're trying to exit your company at all, or sell it, you know, that whatever you want to call it. So
did
that
you know,
one.
sorry to interrupt. I'm just curious. Did you know, because you don't come from that background, did you know all the terms and, you know, terminologies in these acquisition and merger stories, like what the rules are, or did you have to hire an attorney to help you with the process?
Yeah, good question. I definitely hired an attorney and an accountant, you know, for the acquisition. And I think that's just like, I recommend our clients hire us for certain areas of expertise. I am happy to hire experts in their areas of expertise. And like, you know, I can negotiate the macro terms. Here's what the payout clauses should look like, and here's what I need, you know, all of that kind of stuff. But when it comes down to like the hardcore tax laws and the actual M&A paperwork, that is something definitely I want to get a lawyer in on. I don't necessarily think you need them too early stage. The first conversations around acquisition with the PE firm that I went through, I was a little more green there. I had a general idea. I'd been through a couple sessions on M&As because like I'd sorted out probably around the 7-year mark
Mm.
that I should probably figure out what the long-term plan is here, because I don't know, you hear a lot of stories where people just slowly wind down their shops, or it just blows up one day and everybody gets laid off. And I didn't want any of that. Like to have a much more controlled plan going forward. So, you know, I followed some of the best practices in terms of okay, we already ran a lean shop. Things that matter if people are looking to acquire you are, your EBITDA first and foremost, and how turnkey the operation is. Is everything reliant on you, or do other people do the work, and are there processes in place? And we started to put those in place. But for me, it wasn't getting all of that stuff in place. So processes, being organized, divesting the skill sets amongst the group, becoming a very profitable company. You should do all those things even if you don't want to exit. You know what I mean? And then my whole point there was I'm going to do this because it sounds like the proper way to structure your business. And if someone shows up who has an interest in acquiring the firm, then I'm willing to engage in those conversations, because there's other things I eventually want to do in my life. But if nobody shows up, then at least I have a profitable, sustainable company that doesn't rely solely on me, right? So it's kind of you win either way if you go through those steps.
And it's such a smart way to approach it, because there's so many people who just kind of go, and someone goes, I want to get in on that. You're like, now what?
Yeah, totally, right?
Oh crap, I have to clean out the things that I haven't touched,
Yeah, and I think a lot of people get to the point where all of a sudden they realize they have an eighth of a tank of gas left, and their numbers look like shit, and it's they're not a very attractive organization for an acquisition.
For you, the moment came when the company approached you, not that you were looking for them. Somebody came, and so at that moment, so you were thinking about that from the beginning, or it was just you wanted to explore that option and see what comes out of the discussions, and then we figure it out. What's that approach?
Yeah, it's basically the latter. I wasn't listing the organization as up for acquisition, or even kind of letting a lot of people know I wasn't looking to be acquired. But I wanted to have it at the spot where if an offer came, it was Paperleaf was at the top of its game. And so what ended up happening was there was a fellow I ended up knowing who was a partner at a larger marketing and advertising firm with a couple locations within our province. And, we had a mutual friend, Rick is his name. He's from Australia originally. Our mutual friend is from New Zealand. So they got on, we met somewhere. And occasionally over the few years prior to the acquisition, we would just meet up for a pint or go for lunch or whatever, and just shoot the breeze and talk about running agencies and the challenges, and seeing if there's any opportunities to collaborate. And then, we worked on a project or two together. And then he came back to me, I guess this would have been in summer 2020. So we're in the throes of the pandemic when everything was on fire. But just saying hey, they're a larger shop than us. They're about 75 people, and they really wanted to double down on their digital game. And, for the listeners who aren't aware, Paperleaf focuses primarily on web apps and mobile apps and larger technical websites. And so he's like, that's an area we really want to focus on. And are you guys open to an acquisition if the terms are right? And I was like, yeah, let's chat about it, kind of thing. And it was all very informal, at the start. You're just feeling everything out and making sure it's a win-win situation, And then for us, I was just kind of we have some problems where we build products for clients who haven't figured out how to take them to market or actually acquire users, and that's where ZGM, Rick's firm who acquired us, that's where they come in, right? Where, okay, ZGM can offer Paperleaf services, to clients who need those kind of digital products that, they don't necessarily have the capabilities in-house to build. And then conversely, we could say, okay, we're going to build you this thing, but go talk to ZGM with regards to getting it out in the market and acquiring users. So it's kind of a, win-win for everybody.
You had mentioned as part of this journey, obviously it worked out. There was a positive outcome for the acquisition. I want to talk a quick second about, the failed acquisition real quick. Any
Sure.
insights, quick hits there that you kind of said red flag that you were like, any kind of parting words on that, pun intended?
Yeah, for sure. Like, I don't know, looking back on it, I think the due diligence asks were kind of ridiculous and didn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
The fact that there's no cash, it's just like, it's a no-brainer. Cash is king. Like, the shares of the fund are great, but they're contingent on the fund performing well and the fund exiting. And so that was a huge thing. And then there was just like, what it ultimately boils down to for me was the amount of risk you're taking on, and is it a mutually shared risk? So even with our clients, like when we're working on projects, we structure those deals and we structure those contracts so that we're both sharing risk. We're not trying to load us up with all the risk or the client up with all the risk. And it's the same thing in an acquisition, right? Where it's just kind of like this, you need to understand that you're going to have to take on some risk and the acquiring party is going to have to take on some risk. But if those balances ever get out of whack, then you need to be willing to walk away. And so that's where it's really important, I think, to have the organization at a place where it's profitable and it's running well and you're not like frantic to sell. Because I was able to walk away from a big sum of money because I was just like, no, this is a terrible deal. Like, I'm not going to sign that. And I can just go along and, like, everyone's happy here and we can keep running a profitable shop. But if I was like down to my last tuft of hair I hadn't yanked out yet, then, I probably would have signed anything, right?
So after this successful acquisition you had, how did your role and your vision for growth changed, or has that changed? Like, what has changed after this acquisition in terms of what you want from the company? How do you want to grow the company? Because now you are working under the umbrella. Well, I think you mentioned you are still working independently under the Paperleaf brand, but you are still report to somebody. I mean, you are a bigger agency now, so some growth decisions do come, with them. How is it working out for you? How that has changed for the going forward?
That's a good question, and that was one of the reasons I was willing to sign, the M&A papers, was the fact that it wasn't a merger and it was an acquisition. You know what I mean? So Paperleaf is to remain its own brand, and we are to do our own things. And everybody on the ZGM side and everybody on, well, me on the Paperleaf side, are like operating under those same beliefs, right? I think there is value in being a narrowly positioned brand. And so if we were to, Paperleaf has some regional brand value, if not national. And so like, if we were to just merge all under ZGM, all of that goes away, and so that was a big part of it. So to get more directly to your question, my day-to-day hasn't effectively changed. The stuff that has changed is, I was able to hand off running payroll every 2 weeks, which is great. It wasn't that much work, but I don't really know what I'm doing and I don't want to screw it up. And then, HR and benefits administration, that was on my desk still. And, I don't really love doing that. So that got handed off and kind of those are the pieces that got merged under ZGM.
Back
and
office.
then like, what's that?
Back office stuff. Yeah,
back office stuff, right? Which frees me up to do the things I want to do and I'm good at. But yeah, like, not a lot of growth conversations. Like if we're hiring new staff or changing our course a little bit or focusing on X versus Y, I just kind of make that call and let the partners at ZGM know that's what I'm doing. And they're cool with it so long as it makes sense, right? If I'm not like I'm dumping all the money into crypto, like then they might have a problem with that. But And the reason we're able to do that is that we run, a high margin shop, and we have clients that are happy. We have, like an appropriate amount of turnover for the shop, like all the kind of the leading metrics and lagging metrics used to value and measure the health of a company are positive at Paperleaf. And we do a very good job and a very concise job, a conscientious job of monitoring those. And so like if those, I think, went off the rails, then I think I would have to provide a lot more rationale upwards and would have some more oversight. But Paperleaf got to the spot it's at because I know what I'm doing and I can run an effective shop. So they don't want to take on managing a whole other company, right? That's a lot of work. They'll leave it to me, I suppose.
So what I'm hearing is, since you are working, as your own brand independently, you still decide how do you want to grow, how do you want to take Paperleaf to the next level. So before acquisition and after acquisition, did your growth goals have changed? Like before, for example, you wanted to get to 20 people, 25 people, and now has that changed at all? And if yes, how is it changing? And if not, then why not?
Yeah, for sure. The short answer is no, it hasn't changed. Like we operate on basically a 3-year strategic model.
Yeah.
And we had redone our next 3 years basically at the end of 2019. So we had 1 year under our belts by the time the acquisition happened. And so we're still trucking forward with the 2 remaining years of that 3-year plan. And there's no plans to change that there. And the growth size, for us, it has always been about being able to have a company that ticked all the boxes, not only the boxes in terms of profit and margin and stuff like that, but in terms of like people being able to be experts in their appropriate field. You know what I mean? Like when you're small, like super small, you have to be like UX, UI, marketing, development, QA, PM, sales. Like it's ridiculous. And it's really hard to be okay at all of those things, never mind great. And so what we want to do is grow to the size where for the way that we operate and who we are, everyone can be good at their roles. All the managers can have an appropriate amount of reports and they can help them grow in their careers. And we can have a company that's profitable and sustainable. That's kind of the goal. And for us right now, that number looks like around 35, I think, is what we're aiming for.
Yeah. Okay. That's actually a great way to say it. And, put the goals in that manner where, it's not only about revenue, it's about doing the right thing and enjoy the work. And the way they are doing it by getting better and better, self-improvement, and make sure that you do the job well done first before you think about, how much revenue you're making. So that's
for sure.
Great. Yeah.
And I'm sure you get this too, Varun. And there's also like if you're an ambitious person, and I think a lot of agency owners are, there is a certain size you need to be at to take on some of the more ambitious projects and clients that you want to have, right? Like if when we were 5 or 6 people or even 10 people, or we still lose bids because we're too small, you know what I mean? Where they're just kind of like, well, this project is going to take up your whole shop. And so like, can I give that to you? What happens if 2 people go on vacation? If you're 5 people, that's 40% of your workforce gone on vacation for 2 weeks. Like that can't fly. So there's that part of it too, right? Like we want to do big, impactful work and challenging work. And part of that comes with having a team that is big enough to get signed on to do it.
How do you staff for that? Obviously, one of the things that, we talked a lot about with people is, especially with COVID, how did that work? And then, being acquired by a larger organization. And it sounds like you guys are a little bit more global thinking with where that's located. Especially we've talked a little bit today about Varun's business, and outsource. Is that an option for you guys? Is it something you've explored, or how have you approached to staffing some of those larger projects that you want to say yes to, and being able to support and do that and not do it in a risky way, I guess is the way.
Yeah, that's good. It's a good question. Like historically, we follow a very traditional kind of staffing model, right? Where we're not the shop who has like a whole bunch of subcontractors that we pull in. That wasn't a particularly intentional decision necessarily. We have hired full-time employees. We have, hired a few senior ones and a bunch of junior ones and grown the junior ones on the tracks that we have. And so sometimes that means that we don't have the capabilities in house that we'd love to win a project. And other times it means that we have the right amount of capabilities, and that's that. So, realistically, we have we hire, like regionally now. We're not hiring for fully remote workers. We're not against it necessarily, but just traditionally that's what we've done. We've hired in our regional market and tried to create jobs there. And we have a good process oriented shop for teaching people how to do the work that we need to do if they are junior, and learning from senior folks who come in, and we're open to changing that sort of stuff. But there have been instances where, like having a proper outsourcing relationship would be nice. Like where I had a client who's like, why, or a friend rather, he's like, why aren't you bidding on these government jobs? And I was like, I don't know. I don't look at the RFPs. Let me check. And I checked with the person who does that stuff. And he's like, yeah, it's all .NET. It's all .NET work in our regional government market. And I was just kind of like, oh yeah, that's why. Like we don't work in .NET. And I would love to do the UX UI work and the development work, all of that stuff, but all of it is contingent on .NET. And so we can't bid on it. And so that's an instance where it's just like, it would be great because maybe 30% of the contract is .NET development, 70% is research, consultation, PM, design, development, QA. And so, in those instances, if we had a bench of, specialized technology experts that we could pull in and trust to do the work, then it would be beneficial. But, I haven't really, honestly, I just haven't made it a priority to figure that out.
Yeah. This is actually a big piece, especially after COVID, when people have started going remote and be more open to hire people anywhere. That has opened up the door for a lot of nearshore, offshore shops to work with clients, agencies or non-agencies, because traditionally, as you said, like people were hesitant to do that, but now they are getting used to it. They are being forced to do that, and this also. Well, this actually is a question to you. If more and more agencies have started doing that, do you see or do you foresee it's going to be a price war, or it's going to be like prices or the agencies are pretty similar right now, but do you think there will be competition on the pricing? They will start going down just because there will be higher margin once they start working with outsourcing?
Yeah, like that's the idea, right? And especially behind positioning, because if you can't position yourself as a tight enough expert, so meaning like not just like right now we're horizontally positioned across like a somewhat narrow band, but we have no vertical positioning. We're not like UX for financial services or whatever. That's where you get away from price war stuff. But yeah, you're right. Like if outsourcing, for me, if outsourcing can get to that point where the work can be like hyper reliable and you have that relationship and you can trust that the work will get done like to your quality standards and on time, and then it's cheaper than doing it locally, like that's a no-brainer. But the challenges, and I'd be interested, Varun, to hear how you control this on the outsourcing side, but like for us, we've dabbled in outsourcing, especially when we were really small, with like the occasional local, say, WordPress freelancer or something like that. Yeah. And the stuff that we would get back, we would spend just as much time fixing it as we would have if we would have like done it ourselves, or maybe 80% as much time. So at that point, we're just kind of like, well, there's no point. You know what I mean? We didn't have any cost savings because we're just redoing the work. And like we can point the finger back at ourselves, right? We probably didn't have enough check-ins and a process in place to mitigate that. But that's the big problem that I haven't really put my brain onto. So I'd be interested to know how you guys control for that.
Yes, so I would be honest, right? First 10 or 12 years when we tried to approach agencies to partner with them, we did horrible job. All the problems that you mentioned is absolutely true. I mean, it's worse than that. We thought it would be great to just partner with them, but we did not realize the expectations and the quality that they want, right? We were just, trying to get the work. So that was a good learning experience for us. That helped us understand, what we need to do, what agencies expect, what type of work quality they are doing.
Mhm.
So slowly and steadily we started aligning the expectations, hiring more people, hiring better people, pay better salaries and built a team which was specialized to work with agencies. So we like right now we have we are structured in a very different fashion. Like we have 400 people, multiple divisions, but there is one set of team who works exclusively for agencies, just because we know this is a cream of the crowd. This is what they want to create high quality work. So that was our immediate answer. It took us like 4 years to get to that. And that was one of the reasons why we started this brand called Together, because now we have separated our Galaxy brand and Together brand, and trying to make sure that we keep the quality high. Because with end clients, with other clients, it's not that quality does not matter, but then the amount of the way the agencies want certain works to be done, it's very well defined, very strict format, and it has to be done in a certain way. End client may not need that particular, he's not very particular, right? Or you lead them, you tell them this is what you are doing, so they will adapt to what you want to do. But with agencies it's difficult. So that's approach we have adopted, and then I think that's one of the reasons why we have good solid partnerships with the agencies, and have and that's why this model is working out for us for so many years.
Yeah, no, it makes a ton of sense. And I'm also interested too, just in that, like, I think the next sort of frontier for Paperleaf is continuing to build out and do a better job communicating our consultative arm. Like, we do a lot of consulting work up front for clients who come in with product kind of dreams, or clients who come, or UX research and systems design consultation work for larger organizations who have internal development teams, but they never talk to each other, and all of a sudden they got a dozen products that all look and feel different. And that's the kind of consultation arm of the company that we don't talk about much. And I've sort of put us in this position where we talk too much about the code that we write and the interfaces that we design, not necessarily the consultation services we provide up front to make sure that those are the right ways to solve the problem. And so, like, the other side of that too, though, is me going, we've already seen the like the straight up website development market get eaten up by these pretty sophisticated solutions with Squarespace and things of that nature. And now we're seeing more and more business oriented solutions like drag and drop logic builders for web application. So I think that's the next thing that's going to start to get eaten up on the production side. And so our counter to that is to be like, okay, we can't make 80% of our money on writing the code and doing the production work. We need to, and 20% on consulting. We need to start to even out that balance a little bit. Do you guys ever worry about that on the outsourcing side?
Not really. I mean, because so in our case, we do full service, right? It's design, dev, QA, everything end to end. So we never had that as a problem, because we have somebody in the team to do that work all the time, right?
Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense.
What also goes back to kind of the positioning of Together, in that working with agencies to be the arm so they can say yes, and that allows us to support and be, for you guys to be targeted in that side of the business that you want to keep doing, or want to expand in. So there's a couple ways to kind of skin the grape. I've been using that instead of the alternative.
I like it.
With it. Skin the grape. Let me ask you one question, to kind of close out our conversation. We've to come full circle. What keeps you up at night at this point as a managing director? What are the things that you're worrying about? What's the thing that you're worrying about?
I don't know. I think the main thing I worry about, I suppose, is just I'm accountable for everyone's sort of work well-being. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, the directors have their direct reports and they're interfacing with them on a daily basis. But at the end of the day, in terms of people being paid fairly and people having good interactions with clients and people feeling like they can grow in their roles and their careers and have good relationships with their reports and teammates and managers. That all kind of comes back up to me. And so at the end of the day, I'm accountable for that. And at the same time, especially after being acquired, I'm accountable to the acquiring partners to do and keep Paperleaf doing what it has been doing, like to keep with the reasons that they acquired the company in the first place. And so like, I'm not, stressed out about that. I don't think necessarily. I think Paperleaf is a pretty self-sustaining organization at this point. But that's the main thing. Like, I don't worry as much about, if you'd asked me this question 3 years ago, I probably would have said like sales. That's usually the thing that keeps me up at night. We design systems around to solve for that, and we what we need to put in order to get out what we need to get out. So now it's about that. I just want to have a place where people can do everything that they need to do and they can support their families and enjoy themselves doing it. And sometimes that can be a tricky balance, as I'm sure all of you can understand, right? Like when there's an over demanding client who puts a lot of pressure on your team, but they pay 18% of your bills, like that's a hard line to balance. So yeah, that's probably what keeps me up at night these days.
Well, thanks for chatting with us today. This was an insightful conversation. I think, some good insights, some good topics we haven't talked about in the podcast so far. Varun, any last questions? Nope. All right.
Sure.
Well, for those of you listening, you can find Jeff on LinkedIn, the Twitter, the Instagram, all under Paperleaf, and then your company website, paper-leaf.com. So
You got it.
Add one more thing. I want to comment on their blog. Jeff and team I have been following their blogs for some time, and they write really wonderful articles, especially for the teams, for companies who are in web dev space. So definitely check them out and read some of the articles. They're really well thought out. So
paper-leaf.com, the blog there is the one you're talking about, right?
Yeah, you got it.
Good. Well, that's it. So thank you. That's it, everyone. If you learned something today or laughed, tell someone about the podcast. Thanks for listening. Find our other episodes on agencies.build.com. Plus, we're listed anywhere you find your favorite podcast.